you, Helena, and thank you to Mimi and Blindspot for the invitation to have this conversation with Wai Kin. It's really great because one of the pieces, as Helena was saying, was something that was commissioned for Lahore Biennale, and we obviously spoke a lot while we were kind of conceptualizing and making him and everything, but we haven't had a chance to really. I mean, this is a reunion after Lahore because the last time we saw each other was in Lahore, and so it's kind of great to come together in Hong Kong and have a little chance to just kind of debrief a little, but also to just talk about this piece as well, Time of Our Lives, which is something that was came out in the same year, and maybe for my own benefit and also for the benefit of our viewers, audiences. I was wondering if you could say a little about how the two came together, because I think when I invited you to make what became the Fortress, I didn't know that this was coming down the pipeline as well. And so when you were, it was a really busy year, and you had both, and it was back to back, and you made one after the other, right after the other. And I was wondering, when you were thinking about them, did you think of them together as well?
Yeah. So not only back to back, but actually really parallel. I was kind of writing both scripts. The shoot for the Time of Our Lives happened immediately after the shoot for the Fortress. Yeah. And I was editing them at the same time, and post-production was happening at the same time. And I opened the shows also, I went to the opening of the Lahore Biennale. And
actually, very graciously, Accelerator pushed back the opening for this one so you could attend the opening for Lahore.
Exactly. So I went from Lahore to Stockholm to open both of the shows. So they're parallel in a lot of ways, and I think that they also are looking at a lot of the same themes from very different perspectives, from very different, both moving image, but very kind of different mediums still within kind of moving image.
Yeah.
I think, when I was thinking about these works, I particularly for the Time of Our Lives, when I started writing it, I had been thinking about making a work that really was illustrating some kind of relationship between a kind of performer and an audience in an incredibly explicit way, in this physical installation way, kind of illustrating this binary of performer and perceiver, or performance and authenticity even. Doer and perceiver, subject and object, and it was connecting to a lot of binaries that I had already been thinking about, such as reality and fantasy, subjectivity and objectivity in kind of knowledge systems. So when I was thinking about this thing of kind of an actor and an audience, I was thinking about I thought about a sitcom with a live audience, and how you kind of see the audience within that, and as you as a viewer are kind of witnessing that relationship. And that also came through in the Fortress when you invited me to create this commission for the Lahore Biennale. It was kind of, I knew that I wanted to shoot part of it, the kind of interior scenes, where Wai Kin is kind of rehearsing for this role of man inside of a theater.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time. I mean, because when you came to do the location scouting or site visits, I was thinking, I'll take you to this this UNESCO World Heritage Site in Lahore, or this Mughal site, or and then you were very clear that you wanted a theater, but at that point I didn't know what it was for. It was just okay, so we went to look at cinemas, and then it was so it was interesting to see how that developed in the piece, where there is a kind of a relationship between the performer and the audience that's very explicit. And it's also interesting the way that that carried over into this piece, The Time of Our Lives, where I mean, I think when you were talking about it, you said, okay, well, I want to make a sitcom. I'm going to make a sitcom, and I was like, okay, this is going to be different, because I didn't think that sitcom was like something that, but yeah, so sitcom. And it's interesting seeing here at Blindspot because it recalls the last show you had here, where you had the boy band kind of work, which is also kind of thinking about the relationship between the performer and the audience. But here, like, you make it explicit, right? You actually hired these actors to play the audience. And what was it that that you wanted to capture by including having this 2-screen setup here?
Well, I think it really the inspiration for it really goes back to, I think, like my origins in drag and kind of performing on a stage and performing these other kind of really fantastical characters on a stage, and noticing how when I was kind of in this complete fantasy embodiment, not only did people treat me differently, but I also acted differently, and I kind of couldn't tell which one came first. I couldn't tell whether I was acting differently because people were treating me differently, or whether people were treating me differently because I was acting differently. And I thought that this was like a really interesting relationship. It was almost like a kind of, I don't know, some kind of social contract that was like being enacted, that gave me this like other perspective to reflect back on my everyday experience with, where I noticed how the way that I was perceived in an everyday context changed the way that I moved through the world.
Yeah.
So this relationship between kind of like performer and audience, and the kind of implicit agreements that happen in social settings, like even right now that are happening, like as like we are here sitting up here and you are an audience here, we're agreeing on some level, like that I am an artist who's saying something, and you are an audience that is listening, so I wanted to like literally illustrate this relationship. And it was also I was reading a lot of kind of like scientific journals, like Theories in Metaphysics, about quantum entanglement. And particularly, I found it really interesting, this idea that scientists are realizing that there is no objective reality to uncover. Like, there is not something that we are like discovering. Like, that's almost like a kind of colonial idea of like science, that we can discover truth. Actually, reality happens as we agree as to what it is. And even like lengths of space and durations of time change depending on who is looking, and when we define them, we can change their properties. So this was making me think again about this relationship between performer and audience, and how there's kind of an agreement that is happening all the time. So I wanted to create literally create this binary of performer, of actor, and audience, of perceiver. Yeah. And in this kind of TV sitcom situation where there is a literal script, of course, that the actors are playing on, but there's also a script for the audience. The audience is also being cued as to how to react. Yeah. And everybody is involved in this kind of social script that's happening, and is kind of agreeing to play along. But of course, like within this binary that I'm setting up, the audience is also 25 actors. So I'm trying to, and that's obvious, and I'm trying to kind of undo this thing that I'm constructing at the same time as doing it, while you, as a viewer of the work, usually there is a bench that sits exactly in the middle of these two screens. And the audio from the sitcom is coming from the sitcom, and the audio from the audience, the laughter, the reactions are coming from kind of behind you, as you probably mostly are watching this screen. Yeah. And so you, as a viewer of this work, are kind of, forced to think about your position within this relationship, that of constantly, these social relationships that are constantly being reified between kind of performer and audience, in a way this, this is like this is like a literal world that is being illustrated. As a viewer, you kind of can't actually see the whole thing unless you step outside of it, which was another important thing about this installation.
So in some ways, like putting the audience on screen was a way of kind of helping the viewer of this piece kind of step outside in some ways by realizing how they're kind of implicated in it. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. How we are implicated in like every day in kind of social relations.
Yeah.
There's no such thing, I think, as like, you can't really be passive in like as a viewer in everyday life. Like we are, all of us, kind of in these positions of forced to be, or not forced to be, but like positions of being like a viewer, a spectator of like what is going on in the world all the time. And I mean, I really feel that right now.
Yeah.
But that's not true. We are all at the same time kind of perceivers and doers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting also. I mean, because like I think when you were talking about this project, when we were talking about this project, and you were mentioning that it was a sitcom, I kind of was thinking that you were, interested in kind of expanding the kinds of genres that you make works in, because I think the previous works that you've made, there have been like there was the boy band project that was on view here at Blindspot, but there was also more like filmic, almost like motion picture kind of like approaches to, and you'll see The Fortress in some ways is kind of like narrative film, but also with elements of thriller or horror films, maybe even, not to give anything away, but but here I was thinking, okay, well, you want to like explore the kind of the conventions of sitcoms and situation comedies and kind of the artificial, because one thing that sitcoms really are, they're situation comedies that are totally artificial, right? They're totally made up. It's like, oh, it's like, honey, I'm home, it's like that kind of like, like it's set up. But one thing that's interesting about what you're saying is kind of it draws the connection between sitcoms and the way that the audience being there and watching them taping live, right, like, and having their laugh track and everything like that. There's like a way that you're drawing connection between that situation with like physics and the idea of like like the perceiver changes the reality of what they perceive, right? And so that's kind of like I would have never quite put sitcoms and like Einstein or something like together in the same kind of field. So it's interesting that you're making that link between this kind of genre and the kind of the work with the scientists that you were doing for this project with Accelerator, because you had access to like the scientists at Stockholm, right? Like when you were making this.
Yeah, so like the University of Stockholm is like well known for its physics department, and they were the original commissioners of this work, and lots of other partners came on board to support it. But this work was shown in a room that used to house a particle accelerator. I worked with an astrophysicist who helped me like review the script of The Time of Our Lives mostly just make sure that I got the science like generally right, because I can't pretend like I totally understand general relativity or quantum entanglement. I don't have it.
I'm really disappointed.
So it was great to have that help. But I think that genre is increasingly, I think, becoming like an important aspect of my work. And of course, every genre has its own systems, its own kind of realities, its own kind of tropes and techniques that it uses to. Most of the time in a kind of consumer society, like sell you things, or when you have the sitcom, when you see an open set, and you understand that you're in a kind of TV sitcom, you immediately understand probably this feminine character and this masculine character, what the relationships between them are. and maybe what your relationship as an audience to these characters are, and what kind of narratives you might expect to see play out, and what kind of comedy you might expect to have, and where to laugh. And that exists in also, so you mentioned It's Always You, my boy band project, which was presented here in 2021. Again, this is like, you kind of, you understand as soon as you see this kind of like boy band setup that there are kind of like relationships.
Types.
Yeah, there are like kind of archetypes that are being like played out. There is like some kind of like illustration of like identity that is being sold to you as a consumer. And I think, that was very much, this idea that of performer and audience, and, the audience also within that like fandom, and how kind of desire is like played upon within these like capitalist systems, which boy bands of course are like the product of, was very much like a precursor to how I'm thinking about like audience and actor now, for sure. But within this work there's also the advertisement for Essence, which is another project that I did last year, which is kind of the video advertisement and kind of associated advertising campaign around a conceptual men's cologne called Essence, where Wai Kin, who is in this work and also in The Fortress, acts as a kind of brand ambassador for this made-up cologne. Within that I spent a lot of time watching cologne advertisements, and there's also like rules and tropes and stuff that are very easy to kind of like grasp and replicate within those within that setup, which is which was really interesting to me, because it's impossible to visually illustrate like what something smells like. So scent advertising becomes about selling you this kind of ideal version of who you might want to be, which is like a kind of perfect like illustration of like what advertising is doing. It is like it's creating this kind of ideal image that is as far away from kind of reality as possible, to create like insecurity in the consumer, so that they then go to purchase this product, which promises to fulfill some kind of sense of idea of self within a context of the world.
Yeah, and speaking about the kind of the way that there are certain kind of meanings that are inherent in the characters and the way that they function. One thing that I was really struck by when you were discussing this, I mean, you mentioned that the genre, but you also mentioned that it was a time for you to return to one of the characters that Visin, who you see on the screen right now, and it was like your own kind of way of stepping back and taking some distance, because it was like a version, a character that you had played. But this time it was not going to be you who was going to play this character. It was going to be a different person who was going to play the character. What was that like for you to see someone else play V Sin?
Oh no, that's me.
That is you.
Yeah.
Oh wait,
yeah.
I thought there was going to be because okay, sorry. I thought there was going to be someone else. Okay.
In the end, I realized that nobody else could do it the way that I wanted it to be done.
Okay. So it is you. Okay.
Everybody, nobody on this screen, but everybody on this screen is me.
You mean that's not you?
I did do a few takes. I was thinking about slipping myself in as one of the audience members as well,
really?
but I decided in the end that was overkill.
Yeah, and originally you said that Mimi was going to be one of the audience members too, right?
Yeah, we couldn't make the timings work out.
So it is you, but like, so then how was it to kind of come back or go back to Visin and revisit that character that you had kind of put away for a while?
It was very interesting. It was kind of, it felt very like momentous because this was my first character in my practice. And at the same time, it felt totally mundane because I put the makeup and the wig and everything on, and even though I had changed so much in the however many years since I had last performed this character, this character looked back at me and was exactly the same. So that was kind of an interesting moment, definitely. But I mean, I really enjoy performing the character, and I mean, I think you can see it's fun.
Yeah, and then can I ask you like to talk about the way of working, because I think when you originated Vincent as a character, that was the character, that was the only character in some ways, and then I think with It's Only You developed this kind of other way of working where you had, it's almost like a commedia dell'arte kind of like thing where you have like, are you this type, are you this type, are you, which one are you, right? Which one in the boy band are you, or which one, this is the naughty one, this is the nice one, and so storyteller was one of them, and Wai Kin was another of them. How does the kind of work with the characters, and Wai Kin also recurs in The Fortress, as well as a new character, the Mask, right? So how do you decide, like, okay, well, I need a new character, as opposed to like, I can use this character or I can use that character?
It happens differently every time, I think. There's no set way that like I decide that a new character is gonna come about.
Yeah.
I think that I had been thinking about creating a character called the Mask for a really long time, and actually it was our work together on the Lahore Biennale and kind of doing this research and reading some Sufi poetry, like encountering this passage from Rumi's Mathvani, which describes the ego as a fortress that kind of keeps self from other, that keeps us from the rest of the universe.
Yeah.
That really kind of, I don't know, something really fell into place for me. And, I wanted this kind of foil to Wai Kin in The Fortress.
Yeah.
Because The Fortress is really, it's about undoing this like this archetype of man.
Yeah.
As it was constructed during the Enlightenment period. This time when humans thought that we were literally at the center of the universe, that the sun and all of the planets orbited around us.
Yeah.
And also that we as humans were like capable of complete rationalism, that we could separate thinking from feeling, and that the universe was completely deterministic, that we would eventually know everything, that we would even eventually be able to predict the future.
And we could master it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This like totally over the top, super arrogant perception of like who we were and our place in the universe.
Yeah.
But within that, of course, when you talk about man, you're talking about a man as a stand-in for humanity, is speaking about a specific type of human. I came to this idea of kind of like deconstructing that through texts about kind of post-colonial approaches to anthropocentrism, as the Biennale was about and around ecology, and how this centering of not only man but a certain type of man had kind of really skewed ecological discourse. The work was really about like kind of undoing that. So I wanted to talk about how this construction of the archetype of man was exactly something that was performed, that similar to with this installation is something that is performed, and then within social constructs, contracts that we kind of arrive into and learn to perform before we're even aware of them, that we agreed to be part of, or we haven't agreed to be part of, but we are part of. So this kind of idea that, so you have Wai Kin who is like rehearsing for this role of man and performing this role of man. And then I wanted to create this foil for him. So not only in kind of context where Wai Kin is kind of existing in this interior theater world, but also in this kind of, the mask appears in Lahore Fort, which is this kind of exterior world that is very kind of, could kind of be anywhere in time, but is almost, it's like the mask is like, Wai King's kind of almost afterlife or ghost, or somehow kind of like his realization of how, the nonsense of the whole paradigm that he believed in before, that he believed himself to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like, though the character's name is the Mask, it's like, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, like the mask is actually not the mask, it's like the mask kind of coming off in some ways, right?
Exactly. The character of the mask is the kind of embodiment of this mask being lifted. Mm-hmm. The mask of, the mask of this...
like unmasking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, the mask of the ego, the mask of the self being lifted.
Yeah. And so, I mean, so in some ways, like, there is a way that the characters like carry the narrative movements of the films, right? Like here we have like the kind of like the dumb version of Wai Kin, who's like the stereotypical, like, like the husband coming home. And it's interesting because like there's a way that, Wai Kin here is like very unself-conscious, in a way that like V-Sin doesn't seem like. V-Sin seems to be kind of like, along with the storyteller, are the ones who are kind of like cluing you in on what's really happening in some ways. And then similarly in the fortress, the mask is kind of like undoing all of the assertions that Wai Kin is making, right? There's a kind of a moment of like trying to impose like this kind of like, I am, by fiat, I am the center, and then it's like, no, actually you're not. So it's interesting that the characters are kind of like doing that work for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting with the characters in the time of our lives, like everybody that I speak to kind of identifies with a different person. Like some people think that like, kind of Wai Kin is the main character, and other people think V-Sin is the main character. This whole year, all of these works have Wai Kin in them, but I think, in this work he's very much playing this role of, the man of the house who can't really see his role in everything, but just thinks that everything, kind of revolves around him, and, he's incredibly entitled to his position of superiority, as Wai Kin is learning to, or rehearsing to be, in the fortress. And there's a lot that I think, V-Sin is V-Sin kind of wakes up in this work and is starting to pick things apart and realize that things are not quite what they seem to be. And I mean, to be honest, I think that I had kind of written it so that you would kind of, with V-Sin, be trying to unpick and understand, whether you were in a dream or reality, whether you were on a TV show, whether, I don't know. I think like with all of my works, the positionalities of the characters changes a lot, and that's definitely part of the work.
Yeah, for sure. And then just so people maybe like when they watch this, they think, oh yeah, it's just like a character. You just put it on and take it off. I mean, like in Lahore. So when we were when you were working on that, it was, you came in May last year, 2024, to film. But for those of you who are not familiar with Lahore, Pakistan, in May the temperature is already 40 degrees, and so Wai Kin, you were like putting on this makeup, like getting up at 6 a.m. or something like that, like to.
Sometimes earlier, definitely. I only wake up that early for my own video shoots.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's hours and hours of makeup, and then like and so there's like a whole process of like assuming their characters and, like everything it's not so casual, I guess, is what
Definitely not. So, shoot days are often 12 hours, and that's 12 hours from for the rest of the crew. And I will be in makeup for maybe 3 hours before that. So, I will often wake up at like 4 a.m. to start doing makeup to then join the shoot, which will start at like maybe 8,
Yeah, in the case of, because we were trying to avoid the heat, like, you did it super early so that, like, by the time it, got to, like, 45 degrees or whatever, like, you could take a little...
Yeah, it was very intense shooting the Fortress in Lahore in, not only full makeup, a wig, which is essentially like a hat, full body cover, and then a suit in, like, 45 degrees Celsius weather.
Yeah.
It was definitely, like, a feat of, like, endurance, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, over 3 days, like.
I think it was 4 days. In the
well,
end.
The extra at the end, yeah. So no,
it was 3 days. Yeah.
Okay. I was like, oh, okay. But okay, so because, like, I think, like, it rematerializes the process, like, there's a whole, like, it's not just kind of, oh, I want there to be characters and there will be characters. It's like you actually have to work really hard to get that and to achieve this effect that, is in some ways, like, in video, it seems so effortless, I guess, and so it was really interesting to see, like, what it was like, what it took to actually kind of realize the Fortress anyway. And then I'm sure for this, it was similarly, kind of, because I mean, if you're not just, like, you're having to play both of these characters, obviously you're not with yourself on the stage, so you have to kind of, like, digitally add yourself in to the scenes, right? When both of you or all three of you are on.
Well, I have to composite, for this work, for example, you have, like, one full set, and during the work, for the most part, Wai Kin is in one half of the set, and Beeson is in the other half of the set. So, we shot these, like, medium and close-up shots, obviously individually, and then for the wide shots, we had to composite, the two halves together. But yeah, I mean, for sure, this work in particular is probably the most I've had, multiple characters in one frame, and there is a lot of, because the work is using this idea of, like, general relativity of relative time to illustrate the fact that, like, reality is also relative. There's a lot of, like, time jumping back and forth, and there are, like, several props that kind of illustrate also, like, what time it is, like literal clocks. There's the doomsday clock on one side of the room, and there's the past, present, future clock on the other side of the room. There's these flowers which kind of are replaced by Wai Kin every so often. When they rot, he walks in, he replaces them, and then at some point the vase, like, breaks on the ground. So there was a lot of continuity that had to be kept, like, a very close eye on in this film. There was a lot of planning. So of course there's, like, the script writing process. There was many versions of the script. It was reviewed by lots of people, including Matthew from the University of Stockholm. There was then, after there's script writing, there's like, shot listing. So, like, every single shot that I'm going to take is, like, listed with, like, a reference image, the size of the shot, what's happening, who's in it, prop notes, like, so after you have that document, then you start to kind of, like, onboard crew and everything, because it's a very tight schedule to do these things, and everything has to be exact. There's not really much improvising.
Yeah. For here. Yeah.
Or any of my films, really. There's not much improvising, because there's no. I mean, these are not like commercial films. Like, there's not very much room for, I usually am stretching the budget to, like, the very maximum to try to get as much in as possible. So everything is exactly timed, and the schedule for this was absolutely insane. My assistant director at first was like, it's impossible. We can't actually do this in the time that we have allotted. And I was like, I was like, I'll do most of them in one take. Just watch. Like, you know, we had like a backup plan for like a whole episode that we would cut in case we ran out of time, but we didn't end up having to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, in the case of The Fortress, that I mean, you know, it was all like, you know, like there were multiple versions of the script, but then like when it came time to actually do the shooting, there was like some sites that, you know, we had to like because there was a lot of negotiation with, you know, so the Lahore Fort is, you know, like 1,000-year-old site. And so the authority that's in charge of, you know, they were like, at first they said, oh, you can shoot anywhere. And then it was like, oh, actually, you can't shoot here, you can't shoot here. And so there were, I mean, there are beautiful sites that that did make it in, but there was one that in particular you were thinking, okay, you wanted to shoot, and then we thought you could, and then it turned out, oh, actually, no, you can't. And then...
Yeah, that was like a, I mean... Yeah, Lahore it was incredible to shoot there. It was such a different, you know, things work differently there, which I really, process, negotiating, like, you know, like location, access, all of it was a very fine balance. And actually, you know, a lot of the locations, you know, had been apparently kind of confirmed before, but then we had some difficulty in the actual like shoot day, and sometimes we didn't know whether or not we were going to be able to shoot in a location until 2 a.m. the night before. Yeah. You know, when I was about to wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m.
Yeah, and it was amazing to see like the way that you were thinking on your feet and being like, okay, you know, we can't do this, so I'm going to rewrite the entire script like in the 6 hours before we have to start shooting.
Yeah, I did end up having to rewrite a portion of the script because originally the kind of climactic scene of the fortress was supposed to happen in this kind of huge mirrored hall. Yeah. You know, somebody decided, or it turned out, you know, at midnight the night before, that we actually are not allowed to film in that location. So I rewrote a portion of the script to instead be set in Divani Am. Yeah. But, you know, I think that often these kinds of constraints end up being a good thing. Yeah. Sometimes not, but, you know, I think actually when I was rewriting it, I thought actually this really makes sense because the film is about this relationship of performer and audience. Yeah. And, you know, this first portion of the film, or, you know, a large portion of the film is Wai Kin in a theater performing and seeking an audience. And actually Divani Am, where I rewrote that kind of climactic scene of the film to be, is a location where subjects of the empire were able to go and seek an audience with the ruler to kind of air their grievances. Yeah. So this relationship of subject and audience was kind of reversed, and the power dynamics kind of totally like rewritten, which conceptually like really made sense for the work.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, speaking of, you know, subject and I mean, we've been talking about subject and audience, but all performer and audience, but also like I'm kind of curious to hear how, when you were putting together this particular exhibition that, you know, we're in, you know, that dynamic plays out as well, because like not only are there the two pieces, the motion picture works, but also you have a number of these face wipes as well as a prop from the time of our lives. And, you know, like it's interesting to see how, like, you know, you're not just someone who's like, oh, I made a film and come watch it. It's also like there's a way in which there's a reminder that there is like a behind the scenes kind of almost aspect of it.
Yeah, so that is illustrated in the installation of the works. There's kind of, you know, a front and a back. You know, there's like a, you know, a stage and a behind the scenes almost, which is also, it exists in the work, The Fortress, where Wai Kin is performing on a stage, and when he kind of runs off of the stage, he then goes to another world. Yeah. So kind of behind the scenes, or like around these works, you can see like ephemera from the actual shoot. So you can see the face wipes, which were kind of imprints of the makeup from like each performance of each character. You can see Visen's shoe in the other room, which she describes losing in a dream, which she's kind of, when you are not quite sure whether or not is a dream actually. Yeah, and this kind of idea of like inside and outside, or like, you know, again, like another kind of performance and authenticity is definitely kind of, you know, physically here in this installation. But it goes back to also this idea that I learned from Cantonese opera of the Ghost Gate, where the Ghost Gate is the door to the theater stage, you know, where you kind of, as you cross the Ghost Gate, you embody characters which either don't exist or are long dead, or, you know, or you become this kind of fantastical other.
Yeah, interesting. So in some ways, like, you know, the exhibition making is a chance for you to kind of realize this kind of larger philosophical point that you're making in the film within like the exhibition, the space of the exhibition itself.
Definitely. I think, like, for me, somebody who chooses like moving image, like the use, you know, the medium is the message. Like, I'm also trying to like illustrate the concepts in every aspect of the work, in the installation, you know, even in, you know, the sound, like in the color grade, even, you know. Yeah. It's all there. Every single technique is there to like enhance the point.
Yeah. And one thing that I was kind of curious about, you know, so because I know that, you know, you make the face wipes in conjunction with many of your works. But I was also kind of struck by, you know, your own kind of training and background working with printmaking. And I was wondering if, like, you know, when you were conceptualizing, you know, the face wipes, was that kind of part of the process? Like, do you think of them as kind of like, you know, like, I mean, they are prints, but like monotypes of a kind, right? Like, you know, how do you, is there like, how do I put it? Like, yeah, in terms of like thinking about that larger practice, like, does it kind of connect? Like, are you thinking of it within that field, or is it?
Definitely, they're monoprints. I describe them as monoprints. They also, you know, they're these paintings that I like paint onto my face. You know, they take like up to 4 hours sometimes, and then, you know, that can be seen as like preparing a plate that eventually, you know, is where a print is taken, and they act as archives of like that performance that happens at that time, which is, you know, in a way totally ephemeral, and they act as also like death masks for each character that is performed, and then kind of won't be performed exactly the same way again. And, you know, I think all of my characters also are like literal embodiments of like concepts of binaries that I'm trying to look at more closely or undo. And every time I kind of embody the character, perform them, and then take it off, I'm like renegotiating my relationship with that context, with that thing. Yeah. So you can see that, you know, that these wipes are like, you know, literally objects which are part of that process of negotiation. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think we'll take questions from the audience at this point. So if there are any questions. Oh.
Sorry. How do you add the deep backgrounds? Do you do it at the end, or?
How do I add the what?
The backgrounds.
The VFX backgrounds, yeah. So the works are shot on a green screen, which is kind of revealed at the end of the... Yeah, it's post-production, yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, I'd like to ask about the audience. Does the audience composition, is it intentionally kind of put together? What thoughts went into selecting the audience makeup?
So the audience was cast from a kind of like central casting agency, like very typical kind of like extra casting agency. And I really wanted it to look like just like an incredibly generic audience of mixed demographics.
I think we can take one more, if anyone.
Last questions? Okay. If not, maybe we'll let people watch the pieces because I think that's a very worthy thing to do. So
Yes, definitely.
yeah. So thank you so much, Wai Kin, for taking time.
Thank you, John.